I'm definitely of the opinion that if you're going to do a biopic, you should do it right, it should be accurate. There is no point in doing it full of fiction, because then it's not a biographical account. And unfortunately, Blonde, the 2001 TV miniseries about Marilyn Monroe, is very much a weak attempt at a biography for several reasons. IMDb describes it as a fictional biography, which is an oxymoron, and it's a two-part miniseries. It's just under 3 hours, and it details, the first part is Norma Jeane's life growing up, and the second part is about her career in Hollywood when she became Marilyn Monroe. And I don't hate that as a structure. I don't mind having the first episode about her younger years and the second half about her film career. If you're going to do 2 episodes, I think that's a pretty good way to split it. However, I find that description of fictional biography, not just because it's an oxymoron, to be really unsettling, because I'm not an expert in Marilyn Monroe. I know a decent amount, and there were certainly aspects of this that I did know to be true, but I don't know which bits are fictional. So I just watched this thinking, well, I don't know if that's true, and I had to do a bit of Googling. For example, we find out where the Monroe comes from in her name. I always knew her name was not always, but at some point I learned her name wasn't Marilyn Monroe. And we find out in this film, or in this miniseries, where the Monroe comes from, and I had to Google it, and it is correct. So that part of it was true. But of course, in 2001, I wouldn't have had the internet right at my fingertips. I wouldn't have been able to fact check everything in this. So how am I supposed to trust it? What if you go into this with zero knowledge of Marilyn Monroe? What if this is your introduction to Marilyn Monroe? And this is where the big problem is. Because if you're new to Marilyn Monroe, I'd say definitely don't watch it, because you're not going to know what's truth and what's fiction. If you're a big fan of Marilyn Monroe, I'd say it's probably not worth watching either, because the fictional aspects are probably going to be really, really irritating. So who is this for? I guess the only people I can recommend it to, and this worked relatively well for me, is if you're looking to learn more about Marilyn Monroe and you want to use this as a launch pad. As I said, I did Google a few things, so I did learn a few things, but not strictly from the miniseries. I had to rely on Google. And in general, that means I can't really recommend it to many people. I did watch it as a Kirstie Alley fan. Kirstie's in the first half a decent amount, or the first episode. I rather enjoyed her in this quite a lot. Marilyn Monroe is played by Poppy Montgomery, and yeah, I was quite happy with the interpretation of the character. Were I a huge Marilyn Monroe fan, which might happen one day, I might feel differently, but generally from what I was looking for from the character at least, I felt like I was watching Marilyn Monroe, so absolutely no issues there. But I don't know what to trust. Let's say this was completely a work of fiction, and it was just about a young woman's life and how she got into Hollywood. I guess the story is quite interesting, and Marilyn Monroe as a character is quite interesting. So if you're going in with zero knowledge, zero expectations, it might be an interesting experience. And if you do that, I'd say just make sure you don't believe everything. There are obviously key plot points that are true to life, and as I said, I do have a decent enough knowledge of Marilyn Monroe that it felt believable for the most part, but again, there will be so many little details in this that are completely works of fiction, and that's not to say you can't have fictional aspects in a biography, because you absolutely can. You can have the occasional fictional character. Not everything has to be 100% accurate. But to describe this as a fictional biography is just absolutely ridiculous. Because who wants to watch... Now, I don't know how much of this is fiction, but who wants to watch a biographical show where a lot of it is made up? People are going to watch this because they want to learn about Marilyn Monroe, or they want to feel immersed in that world. And I will say credit where it's due. It felt like an immersive experience. It was very believable. Everything felt very easy to follow and feel like I was part of the narrative at times. But how accurate is the narrative? I don't know. Maybe I'm putting too much focus on that phrasing of fictional biography, but I don't want a biography of Marilyn Monroe that's largely built on fiction with just a few key plot points. So honestly, I can't really recommend it. I will also discuss the ending as well, because I wasn't satisfied there either. So I will discuss what I mean by this as well, and how it just felt really, really weak. But that's the last thing I have to say about this. If you're a big Marilyn Monroe fan, I guess proceed with caution, but if you do watch it, I'd love to know how much of it is actually fiction. If you're brand new to Marilyn Monroe, please don't make this your entry, but at the same time, it could be a good starting point for you to then research some things along the way. But ultimately, as a miniseries, it's not bad. But I don't like the fact that it seems to imply a lot of it is fictional. Because if you're going to do a biopic or a biographical series, it should be mostly truth. In my opinion, it should be mostly truth with a little bit of fiction to maybe make the narrative flow a little bit better. So, don't love it. It has some good points. I don't really know if I recommend it. And I will now discuss the very, very end, because I guess this is a spoiler for Marilyn Monroe's life and also how the miniseries ends. But I knew how her life ended. And the miniseries was getting very close to the end. And I was thinking, well, she doesn't really have a lot of time to do this. Are they just going to leave it hanging so the viewer doesn't know how her life ended? Again, if you're going to present a two-part or a two-episode biographical account of her life, you really should go throughout the entire life. And right at the very end, there's just some text on screen that says, Marilyn Monroe died under mysterious circumstances. She was never a mother, which is a very weird way to phrase it. But that really irritated me because I guess, yes, on the one hand, it was a mysterious circumstance, but generally it's very, very much believed that she took an overdose and took her own life. So why would you not provide the viewer with that? What does mysterious circumstances mean? Again, this was 2001. Nobody watching this would have their phone at their internet-connected phone at their fingertips to just quickly look up what that actually means. So it just feels like they haven't even provided a solid ending. And it just feels really, really weak. Yes, again, there are maybe a few issues with her death that maybe suggest that it wasn't completely straightforward. Honestly, I don't believe that. I don't buy into the conspiracies. Maybe that's why they were vague with their text. But again, I just think it's not providing enough information for the viewer. It doesn't give a conclusion for the viewer watching this. What on earth does that mean? I don't know how many biographies were written about Marilyn Monroe at the time. I assume there were some, so yes, somebody could go to the library or the bookstore and find out more. But it just felt like a very weak way to conclude her story. I feel like her ending was so much more powerful than that and so much more important than just being vague and saying mysterious circumstances. So that really irritated me as well. And saying at the end, she was never a mother, it just seems very callous the way they wrote that. So the whole experience was just really awkward and uncomfortable. Yes, the performances were good. Yes, there were a few scenes here and there that were quite immersive. But in general, I don't think Blonde should exist. I don't think they took the right approach with it. Do I recommend it? Proceed with caution. If you're a die-hard Marilyn Monroe fan, if you're an expert on her life, I'd love to know what you think of it. I'd love to know how much of it is fiction. Again, maybe I'm putting too much weight on that description of fictional biography, but as I said, in my personal opinion, the word fiction should be teeny tiny when it comes to biographies. It should be mostly fact, otherwise what's the point?